Okay, sorry about that little technical glitch there. We are back, ready to rock and roll. So we are recording, and we'll get into it. So welcome again to the Peak Electricity Demand Notification Program webinar. This is our third year of doing this program, so we're really excited that we've been building on the success from past years. This sort of graphic you see here on the front page is intended to be sort of a graph of the peak electricity use each day during the summer on the entire New England grid. And that the highest point there with the asterisk represents the peak day. And on that peak day, there's actually a peak hour. So there's 1 hour in the day or the whole year that is the highest demand day. And during that hour is when the capacity charge is set for some of your largest buildings. So we're going to be focusing on talking about the capacity charge and how you can take control of that and hopefully reduce your charge. And just as by way of background, last summer, that peak hour occurred on August 12th from 3 to 4 p.m. And it tends to happen in July or August, and it's very correlated with temperature. So when the AC load gets really high and on the very hot days. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll dive in right now. So on your electricity bill, as many of you are probably familiar with, you have two categories of charges. Delivery, which is National Grid or Eversource, getting the electricity to you, and then you have your supply, which is the actual electricity. And for most of your city and town accounts, you probably have a contract with a third-party supplier for your supply. And as part of that supply cost, there's something called the capacity charge, which is part of that. And that's what we're really focused on today. So it's part of the supply contract that you have. And some of your contracts may be a fixed rate supply contract, and others may have a pass-through for the capacity charge. And we'll talk about the impact of that. But either way, the capacity charge it impacts your supply portion of the bill. So this chart just sort of shows what's happening with the capacity charge. ISO New England is the grid operator who sort of balances power and makes sure that we all have there's enough generation on the grid to meet all of our power needs. They created the capacity charge as a way, sort of as a form of insurance, to ensure that generators, renewable and fossil fuel generators, would exist in the future in sufficient capacity to meet our demands. So they hold an auction every year where there's a clearing price for capacity in future years. And so essentially, bidders are promising that they will exist and be online and deliver a certain amount of power in the future. And if they meet that in the future years, then they get paid from ISO New England. And ISO collects that money from your supplier. So that's sort of the reason the capacity charge exists, and your supplier ultimately, collects it from you in one fashion, gives it to ISO, and then ISO pays the generators. So the capacity charge that you're ultimately responsible for is calculated simply as the price of capacity times the quantity, and the price is what is determined each year in that auction. So that's a fixed number. You can't do anything about. But the quantity, that is something that's under your control. And when we first started this now 2 years ago, we were motivated to look into it because we were seeing prices were going to be doubling for capacity, particularly in the greater Boston area. And the cost of capacity is such that it can be a major impact on the bills for some of your largest buildings. And so our municipalities, particularly Melrose and Winchester, had come to us to point this issue out and wondered, how can we how can we avoid some of these cost increases? So that was what motivated us. This is an example of what that cost might actually look like. I believe it's for last summer. The price was $6.66 per kilowatt used, and that was a per month. You get billed per month, or it's calculated per month. And across your town, across the buildings that this affects, it's not inconceivable, or it's likely that you might have 1,000 kilowatts of demand, of quantity, that essentially you're using during that peak hour. So that translates to about over $6,000 per month and over $80,000 per year. And that was set to double, so that's another $80,000 increase. So communities were rightly kind of looking at how can we manage this large cost. And when I do talk about this capacity charge, we have I mentioned we have the capacity price that's fixed through these auctions that go a few years out. And the quantity is sometimes referred to a cap tag or an ICAP tag. That's why you see that under the 1,000 kilowatts. So the term quantity of capacity or cap tag is kind of used interchangeably. So the typical buildings that are affected by this are going to be buildings that have a time of use meter. So unlike your typical residential meter that sort of just spins throughout the month and just shows the maximum that you've used total, or the total usage you have, what the utilities need is a meter that can report not just how much energy you used, but when you used that energy, so they can know what you were doing during the peak hour. And that really, they only put those meters so far on some of essentially the largest buildings. So in your town, the high school, middle school, library, city hall, town hall, maybe wastewater treatment, probably they probably have time of use meters, and are going to be the ones that this program is applicable to. And in terms of, if you actually wanted to look at your bills to verify this, the applicable accounts are listed down here for National Grid and Eversource as well. And you can definitely contact your National Grid area manager or customer manager, same with Eversource, to also kind of get verification from them of which buildings are applicable. And yeah, we have a question just on what the ICAP, what the quantity of capacity would be for typical buildings. And so what I was saying before was that, across this collection of buildings, the high school, middle school, city hall, wastewater treatment center, you might have 1,000 kilowatts of demand in that hour. Some are going to be lower, some are going to be higher. And we'll show some data here actually from real communities towards the end. And we can also, you can get information about what your existing cap tags are from your supplier. So whoever your third-party supplier is, I would highly recommend after this that you contact them and ask them for your cap tags. And you can ask them, it would be great, I think, if you ask them for them going back a few years as well, so you can see if they've been changing. So to demonstrate I guess the theory here, this is a graph of the hours in the day going on along the bottom, and then the demand measured in kilowatts on the vertical axis. So this might be your building. This might be your high school. And so there's a peak in usage sort of somewhere towards the end of the day. This red bar, this actually represents the peak hour on the grid that day. So the peak hour on the grid doesn't necessarily overlap with your peak hour in the building. But that's the quantity. Your usage during that entire time, that entire hour, is what's used to determine the capacity tag. So we will come back to this in a little bit. The calendar, just something you should be aware of. The way the capacity prices work is they start, and the way your cap tags are calculated is they all start on June 1st, so tomorrow, and they go to May 31st of the next year. So what's interesting is that your usage this summer is what they're going to use to determine the ICAP tag, or the quantity that you'll get billed for starting next June. So, and as an example, you could say the usage during your peak last summer, the summer of 2016, that determined the ICAP tag that you're going to be getting billed for starting tomorrow, for June 2017. So this is the thing where your actions this summer, if you can reduce your cap tag, will show financial dividends sort of next fiscal year. The ISO just looks back, you know, to the previous year to set the quantity for the current year. So this is just a map of sort of eastern Massachusetts, and there are a few different load zones in our area, and essentially it's just kind of where the transmission wires go to and how they get served. Most everything inside these dotted lines with the letter N is in the NEMA territory for northeast Massachusetts, and prices, and then if you're to the west of that, the W's are Western Mass or WECMA, and below is SEMA, so Southeast Mass. The prices for capacity have been different for the different load zones based on congestion and some other issues, so that's just why we bring that up. Most of our communities have been in NEMA, but some are in SEMA, and you might be in WECMA even as well. So these, oh, and then someone just asked on that map what the yellow communities are. Those are municipal light plants, so they would also be in these load zones as well. They're just not served by the investor-owned utilities. So we have, this just shows for the different load zones. We'll look at NEMA first. Starting back in the summer of June 2015, your capacity price was $3.43, and then it, you know, more than, or just about doubled. For last summer, you were getting billed at $6.66, and then going into this summer, starting tomorrow, you're going to be getting billed at $15 per capacity. And unfortunately, if you didn't take any action last summer, there's nothing you can really do to change that for this year, but taking action this summer can help you look for the outlook for next year. For SEMA and WECMA, you can see this year you're going to be getting billed at $7, which is more than double what you had been getting billed at the last couple of years. And that actually that $7 number might be even a little bit higher. I won't go into that, but clearly there's been a big increase, and it's a real cost that municipalities are trying to manage. This slide just shows what's happening going into next year, right? So next year in NEMA, you're actually going to see a little bit of a price break. You're going down to $9.55, but you know, put it in context, that's still almost triple of what it was a couple of years ago. So it's still a big cost that I think deserves to be managed. In SEMA and WECMA, prices are continuing to rise there. SEMA is actually going to be at $11.40, and WECMA is going to be at $9.55 as well. So they historically had the same prices, and this year they're going to be different. So, you know, bad news is it's still a big cost to manage. Good news is that if you look at years even further out, the prices are coming down. This auction system that ISO has only been running for a few years, and it now seems to really be working to be getting enough generators online for the future, so that we don't have to have really crazy prices to incentivize them to come online. But we've, you know, this year is a very expensive year, and next year is still going to be quite expensive. So what we're hoping you can do through this program is, if we've got your, say, your high school's demand curve throughout the day, you have the peak hour on the grid, what we'd like to do is notify you ahead of when this, when we think the system-wide, New England-wide peak is going to happen. And then you can take actions in your buildings to essentially drop your demand down so that during that hour you are using far less And then as a result, your capacity tag will also go way down. So that's like the basic theory of operation. And what I'll get into now is just a little bit of how our program operates. Then I'll share just some quick data, and then I'll turn it over to Shelly to talk really in depth about her experience, how she's done it, and hopefully that can be a good how-to for others on the phone. So ISO New England, the grid operator, they put out a bunch of data every day and actually every year about what they expect to happen on the grid and also what is currently happening on the grid. And what MAPC does is we take that data down and we process it, comparing it to when the peak, what the peak has been in past years, what the data is doing this year, this summer, and we assign a risk level to the day, the risk that whether that day will be the peak day for the summer. And as you can see, I just added the ISO also has the temperature forecast, which is certainly plays into the risk. But we basically assign one of three risk levels: likely, possible, or unlikely. So if it's likely, we think it's projected to be the highest of the season so far, or it's over the threshold that we think is highly likely for it to be the peak. We're not, we don't want to cry wolf and have too many false alarms. So at the beginning of the year, we sort of set a threshold for likely based on what we've seen in past years, and then inevitably we tend to cross that at some point, and usually in late July, but it could come earlier. So likely is you probably want to do what's called load shedding. That's when you would actually take actions in your building to reduce demand, reduce your load for the peak hour. If it's possible, we've found that ISO's predictions for each day, can be a little bit off, or ultimately are a little off from what the actual ends up being. And so we found that if it's within 2%, if their estimate for the day is within 2% of what we think the likely threshold is, then we'll tell you it's possible. And that's kind of a day where you might really want to watch it, and you might proactively want to, do some load shedding just to be cautious. And ultimately, not just you guys, but big companies like Enernoc, they're all sort of watching similar data and also trying to minimize their capacity tag. So what ISO predicts in the beginning of the morning, doesn't always totally come true. So that's why we have the possible category, and then we have unlikely. If it's out of that range far enough, we have a lot of confidence based on historical data that it's not going to be a threat, and you wouldn't need to load shed. So what we do is send out an email every morning, and through the summer. We'll probably start this after the first 2 weeks of June, and it'll go through early September. And the email, as you can see here, gives you an outlook for the week. So it starts with today on the left, and then goes for the next 7 days. And this is an example where we had that day was a likely day. The next day was also a likely day, and then Friday, the third day, was a possible day, and then everything else was unlikely. This is sort of an exception, I think. Most weeks you'll probably see a lot of green, a lot of these unlikelies, and with an occasional sort of spike up. But this represented a period towards the end of July where we had a few hot days in a row. So you can see that this tells you the date. It tells you what the expected high temperature is, what the peak load or that peak demand for the system is expected to be, and for today, it always tells you what hour we expect it to be. And then on the bottom is the rating. So the hour is important because, again, they determine which hour is the peak, and they look at what you were doing for capacity in that time. But the hour can move slightly, again, because other people are taking actions, their predictions aren't always right. So I think last year on that August 12th day, we predicted that we got the day right. We called it as a likely day. I think we predicted it would, or from ISO's data, that it would be from 2 to 3 p.m., and it ended up being from 3 to 4 p.m. So it can move slightly, so that's why starting your load shed a little early can be helpful, and ending it late can be helpful, depending on if it moves. So you'll see this email. The subject line will tell you if it's likely or what the rating is for the day. We may have some notes below that give some explanatory background. And then we'll also always have this other text below that has links to some of the real-time data from ISO if you want to look at it. I'll show you how to get that. We have some load shedding tips, things, kind of a checklist for things you can consider to do to reduce your electricity use during the peak hour. And again, Shelly will talk about some of that they've done. And then just some background information on the bottom. So that'll be the daily email that'll come out. And we'll send it out by 10:15 in the morning. And then if the forecast, and that's just based on sort of when ISO publishes their data. If the forecast is a possible or likely for that day, MAPC will continue to track the real-time data, and we will send out any revised notifications if things are changing. If we said it was a possible day and a couple hours later it looks like it's definitely going to be in the likely category for the afternoon, we'll send out an update. So on those days, we'll be kind of tracking it. If you're interested yourself in tracking it at all, you can go to iso-ne.com, and on their landing page, they've got this graph. You can click on more real-time data in the bottom, and then it takes you to this page. On the right, you can see this graph. You expand the little system load arrow, and then you can kind of see what the estimate is for the day and what the grid is actually doing. That's what those blue and orange lines are. But if you want to be really cool, you can also get the ISO To Go app for iPhone and Android, and that also has the same thing but right on your phone. And so you can be up to the minute with what's going on in the grid. This just shows an example of someone's electricity supply contract. In this case, you can see that capacity costs are passed through. So in this case, this is a municipality where, if they lower their cap tag, their capacity tag, those savings accrued to them directly, 100%, because conversely, if their capacity tag goes up, they have to foot the bill for that. So if you're in that situation, reducing your, doing load shedding and trying to reduce your capacity tag is really clearly valuable. If you have just a straight fixed rate, though, you might think, well, it doesn't really affect me. Well, when your supplier bid on your contract, they looked at your capacity tags in the past years, and they baked in some cost for that because ultimately they have to pay it to ISO. So I think managing capacity is actually really important, even if you're on fixed rate, because you can use that when you go out to bid next time. You can show your prospective bidders that you have a really low capacity tag, and they're not going to have to bake in as much sort of insurance in that. And we've seen municipalities, who started with us in the first year, manage their load well. Some of them have decided to move from fixed rate to pass-through contracts because they're good at managing their capacity and they want to take all the benefit. Others, I think, have decided to move to a fixed rate where, they might still be doing load shedding and trying to limit their capacity tag, but they're sort of insulated a little bit, from it. So just some options there that you might, and when you talk to your supplier, to just figure out, you should find out, is it fixed or is it getting passed through? So just going to talk about some past results very quickly here. So this is a graph of last summer, I believe, and this is the peak demand on the grid each day. So you can see that it starts in early June and goes through early September, and we didn't really have, I guess that red line was sort of the likely threshold we had set in the beginning of the year. So we didn't really even get close to it until middle of July when we sort of had a day that just went above it. And then we had another 1, 2, 3, 4 days that sort of came close to that threshold or went above it. So to give you a sense, you know, we're not trying to cry wolf and say every day just because it's a new high level is going to be, you have to load shed. But we do have these thresholds, and you can probably expect that there's going to be between 4 and 6 days that would be in the possible or likely category where you'd want to be load shedding. And Melrose, we had, our webinar last year, we highlighted Melrose, Lynn, and Acton-Boxborough, who were able to get data about their cap tags and their usage and showed some really great reductions. I'm just going to talk about Lynn here very quickly. At the end of the presentation and the slides I circulate, the same data will be shown for Melrose and Acton-Boxborough that we circulated. But I want to get on to Shelly. So in Lynn here, they looked, I believe this is for their high school as well as a couple of other big buildings. This first line here shows that their 3-year average for their cap tag, so we look back at what's been their average cap tag to kind of get a baseline. It was about almost 1,400. And at a price of $6.66, their cost was about $111,000. For the 2016-2017 summer, last summer basically, they were able to drive their cap tag down to 663. So they had a 52% reduction. And at the same price, that ended up being about a $58,000 savings. And we just highlighted on the bottom, one of the buildings they did this in was their high school, which had a 74% reduction in its cap tag. So you can really take control of this and see some big savings. And then this also, the bottom of the table, we just extrapolated out sort of to this summer with the $15 price tag. If they were able to maintain that same reduction, that same 600 cap tag, they would be saving $131,000 compared to what they would have if they just didn't do load shedding and stayed at their old average. So again, Lynn is a big city, has a lot of buildings, but the numbers do add up for sure. And you can take a look at the Melrose and the Acton-Boxborough ones on the bottom there. I would be happy to talk to anybody about how to get a hold of your data, which can be done by making a request to the utilities and how to process that to figure out your costs. And I won't go through this, but these are just some of the things that Lynn highlighted in how they got buy-in to their program, how they engaged the different stakeholders who are managing the buildings, who have control of some of the systems and the users to, you know, be aware of what this program was and then be able to react to those likely days to be able to load shed and take effective actions. So I would definitely say, you know, check that out. I think we'll hear a lot more from Shelly. But the reason we're doing this webinar now, and honestly, you know, we could have even maybe done it a little bit earlier, is that we do think you want to take this information back, I think, and talk to those affected stakeholders. If it's going to be the schools, engage with the principals or the superintendent and their facility staff and to find out, you know, are they up for this, and how would you do it? What types of things could you manage to reduce your electricity load? Are there things on HVAC, on lighting, on peripherals that you could manage? And sometimes it's going to be a very manual process. I think I remember Bedford had told us one of their buildings, they went up and actually like flipped a switch on the roof for their AC units. But others, you might have building automation systems that you can just adjust very quickly. So having these discussions soon is really important, and certainly for those discussions, having an idea of the financial impact can definitely make people more willing to go along with this. And so again, we can help you come up with what the potential savings could be based on, you know, what your existing cap tags are and what buildings those apply to. So feel free to reach out to us afterwards. And again, we will follow up with email addresses and whatnot, as well as the presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shelly. Oh, and before that, there was one question that came in I just saw. I'm just going to zoom back to the supply contract. So what I was getting at was that in the contract for electricity supply that your city or town probably has with a third-party supplier, you probably have many communities have a fixed rate. So it's just, say it's, you know, 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and no matter what you do on your on the capacity tag, it doesn't really impact the price you pay per kilowatt or for electricity to your supplier for that contract term. But others have a contract like this one where the capacity cost is passed through. So they have a cost per kilowatt hour for electricity, but then they're also going to get a bill from their supplier that is specifically for the capacity charge. And so those communities are going to really see it directly, the impact of capacity, because there will actually be a separate charge for it. These other communities that don't have a pass-through, it's sort of baked into your fixed rate, and you won't see the benefit as immediately, but you can still certainly benefit, I think, on future electricity contracts, because they won't have to bake as much sort of risk into that fixed rate. All right, so, Shelly, over to you.
Okay. Can folks hear me?
Patrick can, and everyone else is on mute.
Can folks hear me?
Oh, yeah, so Shelly, everyone else is on mute. If anyone can't, I'll have them send a...
Okay, how's this? Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay, great. I wanted to talk a little bit about the City of Quincy's experience. We participated in the peak demand load shedding last summer for the first time. And this is my contact information if anyone wants it. So we can go to the next slide. So Quincy the city has a little bit more than 300 electricity accounts. The city uses about 20 million kilowatt hours a year. We spend about $3 million a year on electricity costs, and the city has about 50 buildings that we manage. 20 of them are schools, and about 30 of them are city halls and police stations and fire stations and a whole bunch, Department of Public Works, a whole bunch of other buildings. So that's sort of the profile of who we are. We're a National Grid customer, and we're in SEMA, so we're south of the city. Other communities in SEMA are Weymouth and Randolph and Holbrook and Stoughton and Avon, and I think that's it. Maybe there are a few others. Patrick's examples to date dealt with, I think, NEMA, but we had a different ICAP tag. So last year, our ICAP tag was $3.15. I think Patrick's examples in NEMA were at $6.66. But this summer, we knew that they were going up to $7.03. So it gave us some motivation to try to deal with this. What we decided to do, not to drive ourselves completely crazy, was to focus exclusively on our G3 buildings, which G3 is the tariff that we have for time of use meters. And in our case, it was 4 schools. Some of the schools had summer programs, some of them didn't. None of our administrative buildings were G3 metered. In some ways, that made it easier for us in that we didn't have to deal with trying to work around folks who are, I couldn't even imagine saying to the mayor, listen, we're going to raise the temperature of the air conditioning. And maybe he would have been fine with it, but we thankfully didn't have to deal with that challenge. So some of our schools were again, largely unoccupied except for custodians or maintenance staff, but we do have some summer programs that we run in some of the schools. And it really spoke to the fact that we really needed to involve the school department personnel to make this work. So what I would say is communication was really the key prior to the first event. Though honestly not that much prior, I had hoped that the first event wouldn't be quite so soon. I had sent an email to all affected parties, and because this is, in our case, it was dealing with the schools, we sent notification to the school superintendent, to the school's business manager thinking that this has got financial implications, so maybe there'll be buy-in at that end. We spoke to all of the principals involved, the coordinator for custodial services, because in a lot of cases it would be the custodians who would be implementing the actual changes. We spoke to the director of plant maintenance so that if there was any maintenance going on in the building or if it involved the electricians, that they would have support from their director. And we also spoke to public buildings commissioners, and the city has an energy technician who's really quite facile in building HVAC controls. And then I met individually with each one of the head custodians at the 4 schools to talk to them about what we wanted to do and how we would do it, and to try to understand how much basically the energy technician and I would have to do and how much the head custodian could actually execute. And we explained the purpose. We said, listen, we're doing this to try to save money. It's a smart thing to do environmentally, but we really spoke to it in terms of saving money. And we explained the scope, and the way we explained it is that on what will likely be the most hot and humid days of the summer, when everybody's got their air conditioning on, those are probably the days where there's a likelihood of the grid reaching peak demand. We said it would likely be later in the afternoon. The idea being that later in the afternoon, first of all, it gets hotter as the days go on, but also you might have a mix of people at home turning on their air conditioning as well as businesses having their air conditioning on. And we said it'll also happen several times over the summer. We shared the MAPC weekly risk table that Patrick showed where it said, you know, there will be several days where it's unlikely and one day where it's going to be likely and one day where it's going to be possible. We didn't share those regularly, but we shared them in the beginning to try to explain the program. And we also explained that we were not going to cancel activities. We were going to try to reset, and I wrote down the air conditioning controls, but truthfully it was the ventilation and air conditioning controls. And we were going to make sure that unnecessary lights were turned off. Those are all good practices to have anyway, but we knew that there was some slack in our controls where we don't manage things quite as tightly as is ideal. But we said on these peak demand days, we are going to manage things as tightly as we can. Also, I just want to go back. I'm noticing that there's a question that came through. I had talked about G3, and with G3 accounts, it's a rate tariff that National Grid uses for basically large buildings that have heavy commercial loans that they install time of use meters in. So that's what G3 is. You'll on your utility bill, it will say what your rate is, and G3 is one of those rates. I also got another question about whether we turned off the HVAC with our library, and the answer is no. Again, we were focusing exclusively on these 4 schools. So, and we were wondering what we would do if, in fact, we were going to do it in the library. I think we probably wouldn't have turned off the air conditioning. We might have raised the temperature a little bit, a few degrees, but we didn't run into that situation because we did not focus at all on our libraries. We only focused on 4 schools. So next slide. So the day of the first event. So what I did was from our custodian's office, I got a list of any special events that were scheduled for each school. So I knew, for example, that the gym at Quincy High School had been rented out and was going to be in use until 9 p.m. that night. I knew when summer schools was scheduled to end. I knew you know, if there was a daycare program at a school, what hours those were scheduled for. Again, you know, I had the benefit of working in schools where there are a discrete and limited number of activities at those facilities over the summer. I later found out that our schools have a program called School Dude, which they use to schedule all of those events and to keep the custodians informed about what events are taking place where, so that the custodians can.
This is Patrick. I should jump in. Your connection kind of just changed and got a little echoey. So I don't know if anything happened, but.
Huh. I don't think I did anything. Is it still echoey?
It is. Maybe you could maybe try, I don't know, speakerphone and then not speakerphone or something.
I'm not on the phone.
Oh, right, you're on the computer. Could you? Well, okay. Maybe you could just try disconnecting and reconnecting, or if that's an option.
I'm a little nervous to do that, but I'll give it a shot.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little rough.
Sorry.
All right, we'll pause. No problem. Thanks. So, yeah, while Shelly is doing that, this is Patrick again. I'm just going to mention a couple of things. One. Ooh. Okay. Nope. One was just that, you know, in addition to all the cost savings, there is an environmental piece to this, which is that at the peak on the grid, that's when some of the dirtiest fuels tend to come online. These are could be oil plants that are really expensive to run, except on the most, you know, peak and expensive times, or usually also natural gas peaker plants. So, you know, by reducing your usage on these peak times, that really is helping to avoid some of the dirtiest energy use. And I think also, we were talking a little bit about AC there. I think it is important as a potential option to do pre-cooling as well in your buildings, if you know, especially that people are going to need to be there, or if it is the town hall or the city hall where the mayor is. Pre-cooling the building ahead of time can be a helpful way to keep it a little cooler during that hour or two. And also, a reminder, we've had some questions about the rates of which are the time of use accounts. Shelly mentioned you can check your bill. We had that list in the beginning of the webinar. You can definitely also contact your community manager or community liaison from either Eversource or National Grid, and they should be able to give you a list or at least help you find out if you can tell them the buildings you're interested in. Start with the biggest ones first if they have a time of use account. Great. Let's see. Shelly, have you rejoined us? Oh, there's Shelly. Oh, so Shelly's there. I think I just need to unmute Shelly, and she'll be back. Let me unmute her. All right, Shelly, I think you're back.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, beautiful.
Much better.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I don't know where you were. I don't know if I'm interrupting or whether I should just continue.
Oh, you're great. Keep going.
Okay. So I think what I was saying is that I subsequently learned that our schools use a program called School Dude for scheduling. So I was granted access to School Dude, and now I can look up any time any events that are happening at any of our schools. What I did that first day of the first likely event was I called each one of the 4 head custodians and reviewed the plan and said, in some cases, so remember, you're going to make sure that all the lights are shut off and turn off any unnecessary HVAC equipment. And in other cases, I said, so remember, I'm going to turn off some of the HVAC equipment. I know that you have events in these locations, and I won't affect those areas. In all cases, I made sure that the custodians were dealing with the lighting and I was dealing with the HVAC. Or if they were capable, they were dealing with the HVAC. And that was really determined both by the complexity of the HVAC systems as well as their skill level and their comfort in working with it. I also sent emails to each one of the 4 principals reminding them that we were going to be doing this activity later that day, and to inquire if anyone expected this to be inconvenient because something was happening. And I indicated what activities I was aware of that were going to be happening at their facilities during the peak hours, with the notion that we were not going to try to affect those. I was really pleasantly surprised from both the custodians and the principals about the strong desire that they felt to save energy. They said that it drove them crazy too when energy was being used unnecessarily, and so that was great. And during the event and during the first few events, I left my office and I ran to the schools to see what I could see, to see if there were some lighting that was on that we didn't expect there to be on, or other things like that. In general, I didn't always have the opportunity to get into the building, so sometimes I was just noticing lighting in hallways or lighting on the exterior of the building that hadn't been completely shut off. And the next day after the event, I talked to the custodians and tried to get their feedback and some suggestions. I found out that in one case a lighting control panel wasn't working, and that became an issue because we did not have the kind of control to turn off the lighting that we had expected. And I also, especially after that first event, sent out a thank you letter to everyone, specifically thanking the custodians and letting their supervisors know that I thought that they had done a good job in the idea of building cooperation. And when you're asking somebody to do work that they're not necessarily ordinarily doing, I like them, and I know that I'm going to have to ask them to do it multiple times. I try to get them to feel good about it and to let them know that I really appreciated any extra effort on their part. And then, you know, and then these events were repeated. It was, you know, it felt a little bit last summer like shampooing your hair, where you lather, rinse, repeat, and lather, rinse, repeat, and lather, rinse, repeat, where it felt last summer like there were many events, not an overwhelming, but probably 7 or 8 events. I've lost track. So so we needed to repeat this over and over again. If you can go to the next slide. So this was Quincy's results, and you can see that Quincy as a city went from 2,900 ICAP tag the previous summer, and last summer we brought it down to 2,118. So we had a 27% reduction, which translates into a little bit more than $88,000 in avoided costs. So we're really pleased with that. It's you know, we were in fact able to save a chunk of money. The 4 buildings that we concentrated on, those were even more success, or were a significant part of our success. So those 4 buildings combined had an ICAP tag of 1,044 the previous summer and last, and then because of our actions last summer, it's now down to 438. So those 4 buildings had a 58% reduction. For us, what was surprising, and again, last summer was the first summer that we had solar installed on 13 of our buildings, and the 13 buildings with solar photovoltaics had a very pronounced drop in ICAP tag. In fact, we even had 6 buildings that had a 0 ICAP tag during the peak period last summer. And what really happened is our consumption didn't go down, but we reduced in excess of our consumption during those periods. And that was especially surprising to me because the day of peak demand last summer was a fairly cloudy day. It was noted as a 71% cloud cover. So even with that, the ability to produce solar and to produce electricity through solar reduced our demand for electricity from the grid. So that really complemented our actions in terms of load shedding. And I'll just run through the next 2 slides quickly. So our buildings with solar have access to this reporting. The red shows our electricity consumption during the day, and the multicolored bars show the photovoltaic production. The top graph is for a non-peak day. It actually was 2 days before the peak. And what you can see is that ordinarily the building ramps up pretty quickly in the morning, stays at a fairly consistent level, and at 3 o'clock, which is the time that the custodians typically leave, they shut the building down and our demand drops precipitously. What we were able to do on August 12th, which is the day of peak demand, and that's the lower chart, is we were able to load shed an hour early. And I talked to the custodians. The custodians acknowledged the fact that even though they would still be working in the buildings, that it wouldn't get hot and humid, wouldn't get uncomfortable over the course of an hour. So they were comfortable load shedding earlier, before they left. And we went from a high of 192 kilowatt hours at 2 p.m. down to 71 kilowatt hours at 3 p.m. So that was a pretty significant drop. Again, not atypical in that there would be a drop, but we were able to push that drop back earlier without discomfort in the buildings. The next slide shows...
Actually, Shelly, I'm just going to jump in 1 sec. I know we've thank you so much. We've hit 12 o'clock, so I recognize, or 1 o'clock. So I recognize some people are going to need to leave. Shelly and I will hang on, and we can deal with any questions. We don't think we have any outstanding questions right now, but again, it will be we will record this and post it, circulate slides, recording the whole bit. So if you have to jump off, you can listen to any questions that get submitted later. So yeah, all right. So back to you, Shelly, and if anyone has any last-minute questions, submit them via the Q&A box to Caroline.
Okay. And this is my last slide. So Quincy High School was another one of the buildings that we load shed. Again, the few days before the peak demand day, we ran the building the way we ordinarily do, which is the building runs at a fairly high level until 6 p.m., and then it gradually closes down, as most of the night schools and things are done at 6 p.m., but we do still have a few programs ongoing. On the day of peak demand, you can see that we pushed that back several hours earlier. We shut down limited areas of the building, not the whole building, but we shut down a bunch of areas in the building where we knew that there would be no activities. And so you can see that at 2 p.m. we were using somewhere around 238 kilowatt hours, but by 3 p.m. it had dropped to 184. So again, a pretty steep drop, not as steep as North Quincy High School, but a sizable drop as well. I'll ask you to ignore both the red dip and blip that shows up at around 9 p.m. That's actually just a loss in communication with our reporting. So the usage wasn't recorded at 9 p.m. and then showed up in the 10 p.m. reading. So I think we still have areas for improvement. We'd like to bring the base load down even more than we've brought it down. We have some lighting work that we can do this year that we weren't able to do in the past. And we have, because I think we're so successful, we've been able to have additional conversations with folks about scheduling activities and trying to concentrate activities in only one wing of a building and to make it easier to turn off more equipment. So with that, I think I will sign off or wait for questions. I want to really thank everybody and wish everyone, that hopefully we'll get an early peak on a sunny day, and then we'll be able to all share in the success of this program next year.
Great. Well, Shelly, thank you so much. I think it's a really great sort of model. Your lather, rinse, and repeat, and reward people and commend them is, I think, a great model. And I think some others in Melrose and Bedford have used something similar and found that it's been a process, but putting in the work up front here, and I think if you put the work in June to lay this foundation, you'll be really ready to go for the summer, and then you can build on it in future years. So we will follow up with all of this stuff, as well as I think what we'll do is we'll sort of assume folks on the list would like to be on our daily notification list. We'll start that in mid-June, and if you don't, you can just let us know, and we'll take you off. But also, we'd love it if, you know, you could, if you are well connected with your energy managers or energy committees in neighboring towns or cities, let them know about this. We want to have as much impact as possible, so please, you know, spread the word. It's free to join. Just a note for those in the webinar, it is only for, we do only put municipal officials on the actual list, so folks with municipal buildings. So, but if you're commercial, give us a call. I should say, actually, as long as you're a facility manager, we can put you on the list. So we did have a couple commercial buildings join last year, which was cool. Anyways, thank you very much for everyone for joining, and I think with that, I don't have any other questions, so I will leave it there, and we will be in touch. So thank you very much.